Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming back with us for this episode of Herbal Wisdom. I am Kris Vaughan, and I am here today again with Rachel Alm and Candice Cook. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to have you here. We always have such a great time when we sit and chit chat. And so I wanted to talk today about how, as herbalists, we choose to get our herbs, right? And so we have a lot of options where we can purchase herbs or we can grow herbs on our own, or we have an abundance sometimes of herbs out in the wild that we get to use. And so I know that some of our listeners might not be familiar with the term wildcrafting. So I wanted for us to talk today about wildcrafting our herbs versus cultivation of herbs. So how does that sound?
Sounds great. I have many thoughts.
Oh,
Me
okay.
too.
That's great.
Many thoughts, things herbalists love to talk about.
That's right. Well, and you, as we talked about in our last episode, one of your big projects this year is doing a garden,
Yes. Yeah,
right?
kind of a big leap actually from garden to farm. Yeah. So that's kind of my big work. I've grown vegetables and herbs, both culinary and medicinal, and flowers forever. Wherever I lived, I've had a garden, a community garden, whatever I can, any little patch of land I can dig up and grow in, I do. And I just love it so much, and it brings me so much joy. And I make medicine with it. It's part of my business. It's part of my practice and my work is to source quality herbs and make them into medicine and yeah, use them for myself, my family, my clients. And I was given the most amazing opportunity to take this big leap this year and lease some farmland. So it's putting my skills to the test for sure because it's bigger scale. But I think there is a lot of potential, and I think there's a lot of rationale behind, growing your own where you can. And we'll talk more about this tonight, I'm sure. Like, in what instances is it better to try to grow your own versus go find it in the wild versus purchase it from somebody locally versus purchase it from a bigger company? There's lots of considerations. Sometimes it's herb specific, how we decide, the source of that plant. Um, yeah, but I think it's kind of hard to beat homegrown herbs if you can do it.
Right, right. And so you had, so you're just starting this farm project, which
Hmm.
is awesome. Okay, so super quick, what do you consider difference between a large garden versus a farm? Large garden versus small farm. What's the difference?
I guess we could say square footage. I mean, typically I'll have raised beds, I've had as many as, 6 or 8 raised beds at a time. That's still considered backyard garden to me. But this is in ground, like, 150 foot, 200-foot rows, spanning, over a quarter acre is my plot at this time. But as I grow, my hope is to go to a full acre and use every square foot of it I can. So it's a scale thing for sure, just the sheer square footage of it, but it's also the tools, we're not doing raised beds anymore. This is all
Yep,
right in the
yep.
ground. Irrigation is a huge piece that just takes a lot of learning. So yeah, there's some differences.
Okay, I'm going to tell you my funny story about my garden. Okay, let me first put out this disclaimer. that I am not a gardener. Okay. I have always wanted to be a gardener, but I don't really want to be a gardener. Okay. But we bought a house at one point and it had a plot in the backyard that had been a row garden. Not giant, but a row garden, right? And I was like, this is perfect. This is the best way for me to really get into gardening, right? And so my husband like tore it apart and rebuilt the frame and made it look really pretty and it was awesome. He did an amazing job and we put fencing around it so the critters can't get it and all of that, right? And I planned out everything I was going to put in this row garden. We did 4 rows. Okay. And a friend of mine who's a master gardener, I went over my plan with her and she was so great. She goes, well, that's wonderful. But do you think you're being a little ambitious with the number of plants that you're choosing? And I'm like, no, we got this. Piece of cake. I can totally do this, right? She's like, okay, we'll see. So we got through the spring and summer of this row garden with several mishaps. But the big takeaway is I learned several things. Number one, I was too ambitious. I planted way too many different kinds of plants. Okay. Number two, I should have put in 3 rows, not 4, because it made it too narrow between the rows to comfortably get down between the rows to do the weeding and all of that. Okay. And the third most important thing that I learned through that whole process, I don't like gardening. It was awful. Absolutely awful. Like, give me a pot. I can keep something in a pot alive. But
Yeah,
no, that was not good. My poor husband ended up
not
taking
good.
care of the whole thing. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So
Are there
kudos to you.
herbalists come in all kinds?
All
Yes.
kinds. I will buy my herbs from somebody else who grows them because
Yes.
that is, yeah.
And gosh, I mean, I'll tell you, it's way too much work, and there's always a lesson in humility in gardening. And if you don't love it, then it's not worth it, you know?
Right.
But if you love it, you love it.
Yeah. Candice, do you garden?
I do. Yep. I garden not at all like on Rachel's scale. I'm probably much more of a wildcrafter. So this is an interesting
Mhm.
balance between all of this on here. I wildcraft as much as possible. I'd say probably 50% of my apothecary is wildcrafted. And I also love to garden and I love to grow things in pots. And this year, I had a outside raised bed this past summer. But this year we've built a few extra ones and we're going to do irrigation and I've got a garden plan all laid out. So hopefully I'm not being too ambitious. That is a problem I often have, but
Right.
I think I tried to keep myself in check a little bit because where I live, this is zone 6B. So it's considered a really difficult growing environment. We have very, very short seasons, although this year things have been a little strange. We really didn't have a winter.
Right.
So the soil is going to take a lot more tending to because it hasn't been getting this slow drip of snow melt all winter, which is normally what we have at 66, almost 7,000 feet. But yeah, our growing season is very short and you never know how early is winter going to come next year. But it's interesting. I started the garden this past year in May, and it didn't really heat up to make things pop off until September. And then we got a frost. So
Wow.
it was a really long wait. And then it was abundant and then it froze and it was done, like completely done. So we had a really prolific 1-month growing season. But it was totally worth it, because every little I grew mostly vegetables because it was just easy. And I was like, this is my first time growing in this place. Let me just see. It was so lovely to go out and pick, a few cherry tomatoes or the blossoms off of the hollyhock. Like that was really, really amazing. So this year is going to be actually, this year my garden's going to be kind of a unique combination of wild crafting because a lot of the seeds that I'm going to plant are seeds that I've collected while wild crafting. They're wild seeds that I'm going to bring in because there are a lot of ethical considerations in wild crafting, and even though that is primarily what I do, I still want to put as little stress on the wild environments as possible.
Okay, so real quick
Yeah.
for people who maybe don't know the term wildcrafting, give super short description of what does wildcrafting mean?
So wildcrafting is the practice of going out and harvesting your plant medicine from the wild. It's just basically wild harvesting. Those words are used interchangeably. Wild crafting is, I feel like, a cultural term that we use in the herbal community. And it's a special word for us because it's kind of ancient. It's part of our herbal lineage to use that word. So I think we all still use it, even though the greater world probably understands wild harvesting or just harvesting.
Or foraging.
Yeah, or foraging. That's a big one. I tend to not use foraging. I don't know why. I just feel like I'm not a forager. I'm a wild crafter.
I get it though, because I am the same way. I don't use the term foraging.
Yeah.
What do you use, Rachel?
I think I use both.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
I've never really thought about that until it just came up.
This is so profound.
I never refer to myself as foraging. And even if people say it in conversation, I'm just noticing all of this now. I'm like, no, I'm a wild crafter. Like,
you want to know what the terminology I have a hard time with, and I have no idea why I have a hard time with it. So we all refer to ourselves as herbalists, and there are oftentimes people will call me an herbologist.
I knew you were going to say that.
Which is a valid term, but I can't stand it, and I don't know why.
I had to look it up to see if that was actually an appropriate word, because herbology really just means the study of herbs.
Right.
And so it's like a biologist or a geologist. Like, I think this is the conclusion I've come to. Herbalist is more of a practitioner of the herbs, right? Like, we work with them. We're not only studying them on a scientific molecular level, although we do that. I think it's a little bit different. Like, an herbologist is probably like an herbal scientist, like an herbal biologist.
Yep.
So we're a little bit of that, but we're more interested in how the molecular structure is aiding people's healing.
I love that. I love that description, because I could not figure out why it was rubbing me the wrong way.
It was distinctive.
It's also very Harry Potter. So
yeah,
one of the classes taught at Hogwarts in the Harry Potter stories is herbology.
Is it really?
Yes.
I do love Harry Potter. Yeah, I didn't remember that. So
and my kids will be very proud that I said that.
Yeah, anytime someone who isn't super familiar with herbology or herbalism sees my workshop or my apothecary, they're like, "This is just like Harry Potter." I've got herbs hanging and brown bottles everywhere and feathers and wands. There's a little bit of
a gong once in a
Pretty
while.
Intriguing. Yeah.
Some crystal bowls. It's good. Yeah. We are an eclectic bunch. I love it.
We are.
Can I make a comment? Because Candice, you just started a really important conversation that I think we all have, strong feelings about, which is when we are wild crafting and when we, whether that's your dominant method like you, Candice, like that's the main way you're getting your herbs, or maybe you're just an occasional hiker and you'll take a few things here and there. regardless, it's just so important to really follow kind of the code, like there's an agreement that we have to have if we're going to call ourselves herbalists or herbologists or whatever term we want. I think, it's almost like we're accepting responsibility for caring for the earth, and it's a big deal to me. And I really want to hear what you have to say, Candice. But one thing that was taught to me that really stuck with me that I continue to teach to our students is these 3 questions that we ask ourselves before taking anything. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And actually, this can apply for children if we're talking about how to communicate your feelings, but it works really well also in harvesting in the wild. Is it true? Meaning, can you positively identify it? Do you know for sure that what you think you're taking is what you're taking, and how? Really important. Plant ID apps, a field guide, bring along an expert, years and years of practice. Like, you need to be able to identify it before you take it for sure, without a
Well, and
shadow of a
super
doubt.
important to watch that plant through its whole life cycle before you really understand
Yep.
if you're getting the right thing, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
The next question, is it kind? Meaning, am I, responsibly and consciously harvesting this? When I look around, is there a large stand of this plant, or is there just 1 or 2? Does this plant have the potential to reproduce and proliferate and continue to survive while I take my small amount? Or am I going to decimate and wipe out this population here? Is it the right time of year to be taking roots? Right? So there's the life cycle of a plant. There's a period of time where all of the energy is going down into the roots. Is that the right time to be harvesting or not? What's going to happen to the future of that plant? So it's really a consideration for not just that plant, but the ecosystem that it's in. What else is depending on that plant? Are there animals that are eating it? Are there, insects that are making their home underneath? Is it providing shade for something else? Is it preventing erosion of the soil, right? That plant has a purpose where it is, and it should only be taken for your personal use if you're doing it in a kind and compassionate way. And then, is it necessary? Super important. Like, do you need this, or do you just think it's pretty? Do you have a plan for it? And are you taking only what you need, or are you getting greedy? Is some of this going to go to waste? Are you sure you'll be able to process it before it gets moldy or dries out and it ends up in your compost and it's a waste to everybody?
That I think is such a huge thing for people to think about, because I know when we first become herbalists and we first go out to wildcraft, we are a little greedy at first because we're so excited and we don't stop and think. And so I love those 3 criteria that you give to really make you stop and go, okay, hold on, let me ask myself these things before I even touch it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I agree. I hadn't really used that specific set of questions in the process, but I do go through a process like that every time. But I think of all the things that we could share with people who are herbalists or becoming herbalists or curious about wildcrafting, that's probably the most important, is to make sure that we're always stewarding our environment. Like, the plant communities are meant to be our allies and our friends, and not just something that we dig up and use and abuse. There needs to be a relationship there, and we as harvesters need to have some accountability. We're the only ones that can give it to ourselves. But along with those lines, I always will do like a check-in. I need to know that the community of plants is not at risk. I need to know that it's not endangered. I need to know that it's not toxic, all of that. But we have this gift of intuition. It is like a physiological part of us. And a lot of research is going into plant communication and how we and plants are kind of always communicating with each other. And so what I teach people when I take them out is always just like do a quick center yourself, calm down, and ask, is it okay? I see that there's an abundant community here. Like maybe there's 100 plants here. Is it okay if I take some? The first thing you hear is your answer. And it could be
sometimes it's no.
It's sometimes no.
Sometimes it's no.
I've heard no many, many times. And I'm like, man, sometimes I really, really wanted whatever it was.
Yep.
But I respect that.
Yeah. I found it interesting not one time, many times when I was out and I would see a plant and I would be like, oh, I would really love to have this and I'd love to make medicine with this. And so I asked the plant, can I take a little bit so that I can make medicine? And it was a very clear no. And then I got a little bit petulant, like a toddler, right? And I was like, oh, but it's not for me. It's for so-and-so. This person has this going on and they could really use this. And then the plant was like, oh, okay. And I went, whoa, wait a minute. When I was asking with a selfish intention, the plant knew that. But when I was like, no, I need to help someone else, the plant went, okay, I'll freely give it to you. That blew my mind. Crazy.
I totally get that. I feel lucky that most of the time I get a yes, but I think that's because I'm so aware of that ecosystem already and what's happening there, because I harvest fairly often, but I spend a lot of time not harvesting in the places where I may someday harvest. So just like hunting, I'm out scouting all of the time, but more than that, I'm just sitting in that space and saying like, what does this place feel like to me? What do these plants feel like? What are they doing? I really like to pay attention to which plants are growing close to each other, like in a little symbiotic neighborhood of plants almost. And this is something I do a lot. I'll come up with formulas for what's growing together. And I'm like, ooh, this wild garden is clearly like great for the urinary tract. Or this one is like my dad, his yard is a beautiful anxiolytic garden. I mean, he's got passion flower and albizia growing wild there, like in his yard, just growing, and rose. And I'm like, whoa, dude, you need this stuff. So it's true. Like that's a really big thing, is pay attention to what is growing in the area. And something that I think is really important for people who are interested in wildcrafting, look at what's in your yard first. And once you know what's in your yard, go visit your friends' yards and wildcraft from your yards before you ever go into a forest.
As long as you don't spray,
of course,
around your yard.
yes. Don't harvest where the Roundup goes, like,
or the dogs,
or the dogs, right?
Dogs. Yeah, but I think getting really familiar with what's growing wild in your yard, and most places have what we call weeds that have really amazing medicinal qualities, like dandelion and chickweed and plantain and so many hundreds of others. Self-heal, like you may not have to go very far to get your medicine.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because a lot of times when our students start to learn about our plant medicine, and some of our most powerful medicine is what everybody considers to be weeds, right? Yeah. And then they have this inner struggle, like, I've wanted and needed to eradicate that. And now I realize that I shouldn't. Like, how do you balance those, right? So that you don't get the letter from your HOA.
Right. Yeah. Especially in Arizona, I feel like the HOA is like everywhere. They're just controlling everything, but like, hey, that's a good reason. Go do your weeding and make something out of it.
Right.
That's right. That's right. Well, and another thought too is it's not just take. Like, it's really important that we are repopulating and we're bringing back in as we're doing our scouting and as we're walking our familiar paths and we're recognizing, I'm not seeing a whole lot of, valerian out here like I used to. Then I can be growing it at home, or I can find someone who is, and I can take it into the forest and I can repopulate and, give back.
Yeah,
That's
because
really
sometimes
important.
you don't know what earth and nature and weather is going to do. And there have been times where I was really familiar with a patch of something, like yerba mansa is a good example. I found a patch of yerba mansa growing at a high elevation creek, and it was a little bit outside of its normal range. I didn't harvest any. I got a know about it, but it was really cool to see it just wild and so prolific. And I went back a year later and it was gone, completely gone. And so I don't know if something happened in that ecosystem or if some other herbalists like found it and harvested it all, because that does happen. Guard your harvest spots, people. Like, don't share them. Just don't, because you never know when someone might get like, oh, I need all of that.
Yep.
So anyway, that's, yeah, you repopulate, like Rachel said, help with the seed sowing. John Slattery has a great book on it's called Foraging, Southwest Foraging or something like that. And he talks a lot about how to help steward the future population. So he'll be like, if it's in seed, sprinkle the seed. If it's a plant and you don't need the whole root, just take a little cutting of the root. I hardly ever harvest roots. It feels more intense because you are taking that entire plant's life, not only its reproductive ability, but like you're taking its life. And I take that just as seriously as I do hunting, and I do both. They're kind of the same to me. So, be conscientious of that. Like you said, is it kind? I'm curious to see what you guys' general rule of quantity or percentage is, because I think I'm on a really conservative end, but I've read like, don't take more than a third of a population of plants. And I'm like, that's too much.
That's too much. I think that's too much also. I agree. I'm more of a 10 to 15% if I harvest anything. Because I'm like, what's the least amount that I need?
Right. Yeah. And depending on the plant, like, so I've recently found a meadow with Gentiana lutea. And that's an at-risk plant in the wild. It's beautiful, and gentian and I have such a good relationship. This is a plant that I adore, but I only saw 10 of them. Like I counted. I was like, please let there be. And I just did not feel comfortable even taking one, because that would be 10%. But that's an at-risk plant. That plant doesn't need me coming and digging up the whole thing, because it's the root you need. So I think this summer I'm going to go and like play with flower essences with it maybe, or just see what I can pick up from the energy of the plant, or maybe catch it when it's seeding. I've never found it in seed. But yeah, then there's some things like there's an area near here. Well, red root grows all over. Does it grow where you are, Rachel?
Yes.
Yeah. So I found a huge, like thousands and thousands and thousands of red root. So in October, I actually did a whole like prayerful ceremony with my apprentice, and we dug one up, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a really difficult plant to harvest. The roots are like long, and the dirt was hard and compacted. It was intense, but I felt really comfortable taking one because I spent 2 years visiting with these plants. I knew their life cycle. I knew it was the right time for the medicinal qualities of the plant to get this one in the fall. And I felt really confident and comfortable. I was like, wow, I waited like 20 years to dig up a big root plant in the wild. But there was thousands of them. There was no way I was going to do damage to that plant community.
Yes.
Well, and is there a way to, like, if you're wanting to harvest root, that you can just take part of the root and not take the entire plant?
Yes. For some of them, I don't know if it depends if it's like the long tap root,
Right.
like mullein root. It has a pretty long tap root and it's got a bunch of little rhizomes off of it. But I think with that one, you want that tap root.
Right.
With red root, and as my research continued, a lot of people just take part of it that's close to the surface. Well, it's not what I did, but it was a learning opportunity. And now
Everything is a research project.
it sure is. And like there are going to be times, I think if you go with the right intention, like we all make mistakes. We all accidentally waste something. We all make an oil that goes moldy or we harvest too much. Like it happens. But forgive yourself, but like don't let it happen a lot. Don't be like, oh, it happens all the time. But it does happen. So you've got to find this balance of I'm being as respectful as I possibly can, and I'm a human and I make mistakes,
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned endangered. And so I think it's important for people to know that they can find a list of plants that are endangered or at risk of being endangered through United Plant Savers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I encourage everyone listening to go to United Plant Savers website, find that list of endangered or at-risk plants, and keep that with you. So when you are out and identifying plants and thinking that you have found something that you would really like, is it on that list? And if it is, then you give honor to it and leave it be. And then that's something that you look for cultivated instead from a reputable herb distributor, maybe, or from someone who is, like Rachel or you, Candice, that grows it in their garden, maybe. Not everything can be cultivated, though.
Right.
Right. And so some things we have to get from the wild because they just don't do well in a garden environment. They need that. They need to be left alone, right? To really thrive. And so, what are some things that are your favorite things to either wildcraft or cultivate, and why?
I I like to cultivate things with flowers because I can see them a lot. And also a lot of medicinals that we use, maybe they don't grow wild in your area. Like hollyhock, for example. It's very closely related to marshmallow and it's a mucilage rich plant. It's very soothing. It's a great analog for marshmallow, which in recent years has been a little bit on the overharvested side in the wild. And what's amazing is it's the root, the leaf, and the flower all provide this quality, just like marshmallow. But the flowers are really, really big and beautiful. And I feel like when you cultivate them, you get the experience of tending to something, of caretaking it, of watching it grow from either a seed or a start and learning how much water it needs, learning whether it's getting enough sunlight. I think when you cultivate, it's a whole other experience of being an herbalist. You are learning about that plant on a really in-depth level. And you can with wildcrafting as well, but it's different because it's not in your house, it's not in your yard, it's out there, But I had a volunteer hollyhock this past summer, and that little thing just gave me so much joy. Like every day, I just wanted to go out. And when the buds opened and I let them dry, and then I would make tea after the buds had dried on the plant. And it was just like, I couldn't do this with a wild one, like unless I go to that same spot several times a day because the plant could change throughout one day. So I like to wild harvest stuff that is abundant, like resins. I do a lot of resins from trees. I always harvest resins from the ground, just so everyone knows. I don't harvest resins from the tree. But I like to harvest those in the wild because I don't really have the ability to grow a pinon tree in my backyard, right? I have tons of ponderosas, but they're all pretty healthy. They're not releasing sap onto the ground. So I like to harvest things like that. And I like to grow as much as I can, stuff that I might want to use on a daily basis, stuff that I might know a lot of people who need it. Although I have tons of dandelions growing wild in my yard, which is very, very cool. So I can harvest the greens and the flowers anytime I want. You know, I haven't dug the roots up yet. They gave me a hard no on that. And I was like, for you. Like, I literally had this discussion last spring. I was like, same as you, getting toddler, like stomping my feet. I was like, I don't understand. Like, you're everywhere. My backyard is just a dandelion lawn and I can't harvest some roots. And they were like, nope.
No, I didn't. People listening to this conversation that really have not practiced plant communication think that we are nuts. Right?
And we take it for granted. This is like our language, you know. Right. I think about that sometimes when someone from the outside is observing me having a conversation with another herbalist. They're like, "What are you guys talking about?" We have so much other vocabulary.
Yeah, but we get each other.
So, Rachel, did we talk about your tractor story yet?
Oh, gosh.
Okay. The most herbalist thing an herbalist could have happen, Rachel. Yes.
Is
so
it?
Funny.
Is it?
Okay. Hit us with
sad it. Story. So, I mentioned that I've taken the leap to farming, which means bigger land, which means bigger equipment. And I love it, you guys, because I have just been given the keys to the tractor.
Yes.
And I have been driving my tractor across my farmland. First round. So I am also in a difficult to grow area like Candice. So I'm at high elevation. I live at 9,000 feet. My farmland is at 7,000 feet, a little bit lower, but still it is, arid. It is high desert. There's not a ton of nutrition in the soil. There's huge rocks. It's hard and compacted, and it'll put any farmer to the test, I tell you. So this earth that I am driving, we're knifing it up first. So we're sending, we've got an implement on the back of the tractor that looks much like a knife, and I drag it along, and it's that first line of cutting it, we rip it is what we say, and then we'll come back and plow it, and then we'll come back and disc it. So it's a huge process to loosen up the soil that I will be growing in. And I had this like bliss moment. I was on my tractor on my blessed sacred farmland. The New Mexico sun was setting, the sky was blazing. It was this like super perfect, beautiful moment. And I wanted a picture. So one hand on the steering wheel, one hand grabbed my phone because I was going to capture this beautiful moment, and I hit a rock right as I grabbed my phone, and it just shook right out of my hand. And I was moving along, and I saw it land on my lap, and then it landed on, where my foot went, and then it went down to the ground, and then my tractor tire went right over the road. And I watched the whole thing happen, and there was nothing I could do about it. So my farmer mentor was, nearby behind me. He stopped and he grabbed it and picked it up, and the phone was like this. It was totally bent.
It's like
obviously not working. I could do an ad for the screen protector I had over it though, because the glass didn't crack. It was just the whole phone, and like smushed everything inside. It wasn't working anymore. But the glass didn't break, which I thought was crazy.
That is crazy.
I know. But by a miracle, I found a repair tech, and he was able to put a new screen in my phone. It is running again. But I never did get a picture. But
I'm interested to see a latent seed, made it into your phone, and your phone's going to sprout right out the charging port.
It was so funny. I was like, oh, this is herbalist problems right here.
That's right.
This is things an herbalist would say, right?
Yep.
Totally
Oh,
right.
it's so funny. So funny. Well, I'm glad you got that fixed though.
I know.
Thank you.
Rachel, what are you primarily going to be growing?
So, because of the conditions that I'm growing in, and because this is my first year taking it to this level, I have worked in organic vegetable farms in the Pacific Northwest. So, I've got farming experience, but this scale and this elevation is definitely a test. I'm starting with things that are not too fussy, things that are going to be arid, adapted, and drought tolerant and native already to that area so that I don't have to constantly babysit them and worry, are they going to get enough water? So you wouldn't believe the it's like the most perfect plant ever that fits this requirement is lavender.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Yes. So
Yay!
I'm going to be doing, yeah, a couple hundred lavender plants to start.
Oh,
Yay!
that's
I
not too
know.
ambitious. Just a couple hundred lavender plants.
Far
Yeah.
though, Kris.
So slowly but
So I'm just going to
surely.
do 10 lavender plants. No, I'm just going to do a couple hundred. It'll be
See, that's the
fine.
scale. That's the scale we're working on. So I'm having to think really big. And because these are lavender plants, they are dormant in the winter. I am, slowly purchasing, and I've got them in my grow closet and my shelf and seed trays everywhere. And so I've got to have enough to fill all my rows. So lots of lavender and then lots of perennial herbs and flowers, things that are native or, location adapted and I know are going to do well. And then I just want some annual flowers for first year so that I get the color, I get that gratification of having, some flowers to cut and sell at the farm stand.
Nice.
Yay!
That's so
I
exciting.
know.
And are you gonna video blog this along the way?
Yes, so that is my hope. Now that my phone's working again, um, my hope is to really capture my experience and just kind of document the very humble beginnings and, the fun successes, but I'm also not at all too proud to share my failures and my lessons learned and my, oh man, I'll do better next time kind of it's a learning process. So yes, I'm really excited to share about it. And then I've also got an herb production space that I am renting where all of these things are going to turn into medicine. And so I'm documenting that transformation, the remodel of that space as well. And it's just, yeah, it's a beautiful thing to be developing now.
Well,
Oh,
and it's so funny. I'm watching you talk about this, and you light up. You
yeah.
light up. So, for those of you that are just listening to this on a podcast platform, if you find this on YouTube, you will see what I'm talking about. Rachel lights up. She glows when she's talking about this.
It's my heart's desire, I tell you.
And it's the same way Candice lights up when Candice is talking about her wildcrafting,
Yep.
right? And her apothecary space, her Harry Potter apothecary space, right? We all have our thing where we geek out, right? I
Mhm.
love to geek out about certain things. And I think that's what makes herbalism so cool. Because
Yep.
like I have always had this, I have a syndrome where I have to continually be learning something. I have always considered myself a serial student,
Yep.
right? Like I'm always enrolling in something. And so when I found herbalism, it fills that need over and over and over again because you will never know everything there is to know in herbalism, ever.
Ever.
And I thought it was so awesome. I was talking to David Winston at a conference one time, which he won't remember me, but I remember this conversation, right? But and he said, because it was right before I opened Herbal Wisdom Institute. And so we were talking, and he asked what I was working on, and I told him that I was working on opening a school. And he said, "That's amazing." And I said, "That's absolutely terrifying." Right? And he said, "Your only responsibility is to share what you know." And he said, if all you do is learn, so it was two parts of this conversation: share what you know, but also like keeping my expectations in check in a way. And he said, learn 10 plants very deeply. Learn everything there is to know about these 10 plants. Your 10 plants could be all the medicine you use for your lifetime. 10 plants. And then once you have learned those 10 plants inside and out, learn one more every year.
Wow, that's
great.
it.
That's it. And I was like blown away. And then he was like, and then you share that with other people. Right? That's your responsibility, is then to share it. And I was like, I could learn for the rest of my life, like freely. This is awesome.
Yes, same way.
I just can't learn to garden.
Hey, that's okay. You're here to learn and share information.
That's right. That's right. And I chalk it up to me not being a patient woman. I think that you have to be very patient to be a gardener or a farmer. And you have to be very patient to be a wildcrafter. And I suffer from no patience.
Well, I think too, like, I've known you for a long time now. Yep. And you're a quick, like, you're all over the place starting projects, but not only do you start them, you have follow through with them. And not everybody has that. But your mind is fast, and it works in a way that allows you to like do this and this and this and this and this. Like you have to have that stimulation in order to be you, right? And some people are just like, I can sit and stare at the pine needles moving all day long and forget I have any responsibility until I get home, and I'm like, oh gosh, there's a whole bunch of stuff I should have done, and I was distracted by the pine needles for 6 hours, you know?
And I envy that, because I would love to be that way. You know, isn't it funny how like we might have a particular strength, but we always focus on our shortcoming, right?
Yeah.
So it's, or am I the only one? It might just be
you're not. I think I'm recently, like, the older I get, the more I'm like, let me just appreciate this about myself and accept it. And also not, I have high expectations of everything all the time. And so I think I can go from here all the way over there with very little effort. And it's taken me a while to be like, it's okay to take really small steps towards, you know? So maybe for you, the way to do it is stare at the pine needles for 15 seconds. Then maybe 16 seconds, and, you know, build it up in a way that works for you and your life. But we put so much pressure on ourselves to be like, why can't I stare at the trees for that long when your mind is like,
right? You know? I have many squirrels in my head. Many.
Well, they're in the pine trees too.
They are, for sure. Well, I'm so glad we got this opportunity to sit and talk. I hope that people listening learned some things about wildcrafting and our ethical responsibility. I think that's the most important thing I would like people to take from this conversation, is the responsibility that we have when we are choosing to use plant medicine, whichever way we get those plants, right? There is responsibility in all of that. Because even if you're cultivating them yourself or purchasing from a distributor, we need to ask questions of ourselves and ask questions of the people that we're getting our plants from, to make sure that they're paying attention to the ethics that might be important to us, right?
Support the small local growers. That's what I want to say. God bless
Yes.
the people who are growing these medicinal herbs that are at risk and doing it in a conscious way to provide medicine for the healers to heal the people.
Yes, absolutely. And one day we will all be buying our herbs from Rachel.
Yep. I can't
Or
wait.
any small local grower, all right?
There we go. All right. Well, so for all of you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, we are so grateful that you're here. And so I encourage you to subscribe to our channel on either podbean.com or whatever you're listening to us on, whether that's YouTube or on Apple iTunes or Google Play. We are just honored that you would join us in our conversation, and we hope to have you with us in future episodes. And we have a backlog of episodes as well that you can go back to and listen to some really great conversations on a variety of topics. And if you have a topic that you're interested in hearing us talk about, reach out to us and let us know. Leave a comment on whatever platform you're on, and we'd be happy to take a look at that. And you never know, we might talk about what you want to talk about. So that'd be super fun. So thank you, ladies, again for being here. I always love talking with you, and we will be back soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Kris. Thank you,
Always a
Candice.
pleasure.
Bye.